Well, as Dennis was reminding us a little bit earlier, the season of Lent is almost upon us. It starts this week on Wednesday, which those of us with a Catholic background remember as Ash Wednesday, right? So every year around this time, I kind of wonder if Lent still has any meaning in our increasingly spiritual but not religious culture. You know, I get what people are saying when they tell me that they're spiritual but not religious. They've had a bad experience with a particular form of religion or a denomination, and they've left all of that. And yet, when you take a look at what it is that they call spiritual, it all has a religious foundation. I don't care what it is: chanting, movement, incense, candles, malas, prayer beads, meditation, whatever. They're all a product of some religion somewhere in the world. Another interesting thing I've noticed is that many of the spiritual but not religious folks that I've met who claim to reject organized religion still love the Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhism. Here's the Dalai Lama.
I don't know why I had him, and I don't know how I lost him.
Oh my gosh, we lost the Dalai Lama.
He's in India.
We're never gonna live that one down. Well,
there's got to be a big penalty for that.
just think about it for a minute. Every time you see the Dalai Lama, he's wearing the robes of his religion. Let's just say it. He wears the robes of a Tibetan monk. He often has a mala around his wrist, which are a form of Buddhist prayer beads and things like that. So, the Tibetan Buddhism has these strict ranks. There's a strict hierarchy that you go through by studying and practicing all sorts of levels of monks and things like that. And yet, nobody would say that the Dalai Lama needs to be more spiritual, right? And they've got all of those rites and rituals and rules and religious mythology, but nobody would say that the Dalai Lama needs to be more spiritual. And that's because he's learned how to be both spiritual and religious. He can remain grounded in his religious practices and his religious tradition while reaching beyond them to search for a deeper truth. So he recognizes the value and the limitation of religion. It was just a couple of years ago that, did you know that the Dalai Lama's on Facebook? Everybody's on Facebook, right? And he's probably on Twitter too. He posted something on Facebook that caused a bit of a stir. And what he said was, all the world's major religions, with their emphasis on love, compassion, patience, tolerance, and forgiveness, can and do promote inner values. But the reality of the world today is that grounding ethics in religion is no longer adequate. This is why I am increasingly convinced that the time has come to find a way of thinking about spirituality and ethics beyond religion altogether. Now, of course, people were going around the headlines where, Dalai Lama says we need to get rid of religion. That's not what he's saying at all. In fact, at the time, I think he got something like 142,000 likes on that post. People who liked what he's saying. And what he is saying is, he's saying don't do away with religion or pretend that it doesn't exist. He says go beyond it and include it. He says it's okay to pray, but you have to take action. So the problem isn't religion per se. Trust me, the Dalai Lama is not going to throw out his robes, his incense, his beads, or whatever. There's no way that's going to happen. The solution isn't to throw it all out. The solution is better religion. The antidote to bad religion isn't no religion, it's better religion. Keep the framework, the structure, the meaningful rituals, update them if necessary, redefine them, bring them into alignment with what we know about the world today. That was the vision of our co-founder, Charles Fillmore. He wanted to revise and update many of the things that he found in traditional Christianity. Some of the things that had become a little bit dry and sort of meaningless and stale. And he actually wrote a book about Lent that was called Keep a True Lent. And the book has a foreword that was written by a woman named Georgiana Tree West. She was the minister at the big Unity Church in New York City back in the 1930s. And in just a few paragraphs of that foreword, she captures the essence of the entire book. Here's what she says. She says, Lent is a church institution, and there is no authorization for it anywhere in the New Testament. The idea, however, has a sound spiritual basis. Lent, then, is a church institution embodying an exalted idea. The idea of cleansing and disciplining both mind and body. Then she goes on to say that too many people make a fad out of Lent. It's fashionable to give up some luxuries, and when those luxuries have to do with food and drink, it's profitable physically. There's also psychological value in mental discipline, but such observance has nothing to do with being a Christian. Atheists could get the same benefit. Confession time. I was one of those people who made a fad out of Lent. Went to Catholic school. And I remember being around all the other kids in Catholic school during the Lenten season, and inevitably at lunch or out at recess, there was this bragging contest going on about who was giving up the most awesome thing for Lent, right? And it was usually something like, soda, candy, sweets, and then as we got older, maybe it would be something like smoking or alcohol. And then as we got even a little bit older and more cynical, I remember a guy who said that every year he was going to give up pole vaulting and watermelon. Which tells me that Lent really didn't have much meaning for him anymore. And that's really the key, isn't it? Keeping it meaningful. Human beings can take just about anything, including something that's supposed to be a spiritual practice like Lent, and we can turn it into a showcase for the ego. Father Thomas Keating is another religious figure, like the Dalai Lama, who's going beyond religion. He was the abbot of several monasteries over the years, and in one of his books he tells this story about one of the new brothers in the monastery. Now this monk, before coming there, had gone through quite a transformation, which led him to take monastic vows. He had been a wild partier, a heavy drinker, and finally a 12-step program brought him to the monastery. And in those days, fasting was a common practice, not just during Lent. They would fast year-round. And then when Lent would come, well, they would fast even more. So the new guy took it upon himself to try to outdo everyone else in terms of how little food he could get by on. And Father Keating finally had to call him on this, and finally had to point out to him that all he was doing was the same dance with a different partner. Instead of trying to drink everyone under the table, he was now trying to fast them under the table. Taking a spiritual practice and turning it into something that feeds the ego. So it's all about the consciousness that we bring to a practice, whatever it is. It's all about our consciousness. Positive, negative, cynical, sincere, deep, shallow. It's up to us. We get to choose. Now, when Charles Fillmore wrote Keep a True Lent, he was talking about truth at the level of consciousness. He was talking about consciousness. And as a child, I didn't get that because I didn't have a Unity youth background. I didn't have a youth program or anything like that when I was a child. So to me, the practice of giving up something during Lent was about doing something that showed that I belonged to the group, that I was right with God, did it to get the approval of the nuns, the priests, things like that. It's what was expected of me if I wanted to belong. And then by the time I get to my rebellious teenage years, well, it's pole vaulting and watermelon, right? That's what happens. Nobody tells me what I can or can't do. Not exactly the best consciousness to bring to a spiritual practice. It wasn't until what I call my Buddhist period that I started to understand what was supposed to be going on. Buddhists, obviously, they don't have Lent, but they do have something similar that's called Ango. Ango, especially in a Zen Buddhist monastery. It's a 3-month period of intensified practice that they do in the spring and in the fall. There's longer periods of meditation, longer periods of silence, other special events and rituals that they add to the schedule. And the word ango is kind of interesting, isn't it? It almost sounds a little bit sinister, because if you change 2 letters and add one more, ango goes to agony, right? I mean, it's a little bit too close to it. You know, ango, agony, suffering. Ango literally means peaceful dwelling. Peaceful dwelling. The extra effort that we were undertaking during those 3 months was toward establishing inner and outer peace. And it occurred to me at this point, the revelation I had was that, doing this kind of alternating practice is a lot like exercising. Whether it's running or weightlifting or whatever that thing is that's so popular now. It starts with a Z. I can't remember what's Zoom. Yeah, Zumba. I was gonna say zombie, but thank you. Whatever it is, you can't exercise at maximum intensity all of the time without doing damage. If we want to grow, if we want to stretch ourselves, we have to go into a period of doing things with greater intensity, and then we back off and we reap the benefits of our effort and we start again. And why not do it on a seasonal basis? It's one of the great things that the early Christian church learned from various non-Christian traditions. They learned how to honor the cycle of the seasons. Take the word Lent, for instance. There's nothing religious about the word Lent. It's simply an old English word for springtime or the spring season. It comes from an older Germanic word that means longer days. So they're connecting with the cycles of nature, in this case springtime, in which the Northern Hemisphere at least experiences this renewal, this rebirth, new life. Another thing we do during the spring months, maybe not too happily or readily, is spring cleaning, right? Spring cleaning, which is a custom that came to us from Judaism, where they would clean the entire house in preparation for Passover, which is what the Last Supper was, a Passover meal that Jesus and his students celebrated together. So we could look at Lent as an opportunity for spiritual spring cleaning, renewal, preparation for growth and renewal. So, as Georgiana Tree West observed, Lent is an idea that has a sound spiritual basis if we approach it from the right state of consciousness. So, in the foreword to Keep a True Lent, she goes on to say this. She says, "We must learn to fast from all unworthy thought and feast on the good and the true. To observe Lent according to the Spirit rather than the letter, we must fast from criticism and condemnation and feast on brotherly love." And you can fit in there whatever polarities you want to fit in, to go from fear to courage, to give up lack consciousness and embrace abundance or prosperity consciousness. Someone once suggested that we use the word Lent as an acronym for Let's Eliminate Negative Thinking. That's an easy way to remember it, isn't it? It's a good start. And the best way to do something like that is to make sure that we're not just eliminating something, but we want to implement something positive. When we go in to implement something positive, that's when we realize that, you know what, I need to make room for that and eliminate the negative or the opposite polarity of that. So the best way to do it is to implement something positive. And starting next week, and actually for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be working with some ideas. These ideas come from both Keep a True Lent and also an interesting little book called The Four Agreements that you might remember from a few years back by Don Miguel Ruiz. The Four Agreements with a Unity Perspective. And next week we're going to start out with word power, which is the first agreement, which is be impeccable with your word. Word power. Now, Charles Fillmore gives us a definition to work with when it comes to words, all right? He says words, they're the vehicles through which ideas make themselves manifest. Words that have in them the realization of perfect, everywhere present, always present divine life, and our oneness with this life are dominant in the restoration of life and health. Talk is not cheap. You've heard that phrase, talk is cheap. Talk is not cheap. Every word is potentially powerful. So next week we're going to learn what it means to be impeccable with our word. See you then. Have a great week.